1 week away from on-field workouts between the linebackers and the defensive linemen at the Combine in Indianapolis, Indiana. A perfect day to focus on these two positions, and they are going to fly off the board fast. As a matter of fact, I had 6 edge rushers in the top 20 of my mock draft last week, starting with Arvel Reese going second overall to New York Jets. He's followed by David Bailey and Reuben Bain Jr., also in the top 10. By the way, there have not been 6 edge rushers taken in the top 20 since 2011. All right, so Matt, this is a unique situation with Arvel Reese. He's a classic example of a guy who some people think is going to be an edge full-time in the NFL. Some others think he might just be a linebacker because for probably more snaps in his college career was just a stand-up inside linebacker. That's where you have him listed in your evaluation. Over the next couple of weeks, how are teams going to be evaluating the potential versatility for Arvel Reese?
Yeah, Field, it reminds me a lot of when Micah Parsons was coming out of Penn State, and we had this similar conversation about there's so much potential at edge, but the tape is at linebacker. And I think with Arvel Reese, it's funny because he had 6.5 sacks last year, 3 were at middle linebacker, 3.5 were off the edge. So it was very much balanced in how he was used at Ohio State as a blitzer versus a full-time rusher. Personally, I think you start him out at linebacker and build in that edge rusher profile, which again is what we saw Dallas do with Micah Parsons as a rookie. He played off-ball linebacker first and second down. Third down, he was a situational pass rusher. Now, I think if you're the New York Jets and you're drafting number 2 overall, maybe you just put him right on the edge because Jermaine Johnson and Will McDonald IV haven't been that premier edge talent that we expected them to be when they were picked in the first round of their own respective drafts. But each team is going to have to go through that evaluation and say, number one, how do we just get this young man on the field because he's going to be a top 6 or 7 pick? And then the other question becomes, once you get him into your room and you kind of see where he's at in terms of the pass rush profile, hand usage, the game plan that he has, then I think you can start to build that toolbox and make him into more of a full-time rusher.
Yeah, the interesting thing about him is that he definitely does, Field United, I'm just going to jump right in here. He definitely does have that skill set that allows you to kind of deploy him however you see fit from week to week. And obviously Ohio State saw the same thing because you saw just this past year how the number of snaps that he took on the line of scrimmage really ramped up, and they outpaced the number of snaps that he took off ball. You see the percentages, how they went up from 24 to 25. And I'm sure that Arvel Reese is not mad at that because when we're talking about where guys get paid in the NFL, you get paid when you're up on the line of scrimmage and you're rushing the passer. And he has those kind of skills, and clearly Ohio State tried to really feature them when you look at the tape of how they use them. Look, first of all, I think on the outside, when they go 4 down and they're rushing in a sub-rush situation, meaning they're having 5 defensive backs on the field, you see the edge speed, you see the cornering ability. But then you can move him inside as a 3 technique, as a stand-up joker type, and just match him up against an offensive guard that you know he's going to overwhelm, just like Micah Parsons is able to do, just like Abdul Carter was able to do in his last year at Penn State, who, as a matter of fact, as we all know, Abdul Carter asked Penn State to move him to a down lineman position. Why? Because he knows that those guys are at a premium in the NFL. That's exactly what I believe Arvel's going to eventually want and what he's going to transition to.
Yeah, I think so as well. That is where you get paid. And again, we're talking about someone that will be drafted, maybe number 2 by the New York Jets. I can't imagine he gets much deeper than that. Maybe the 6th overall pick is kind of the floor for him. So if you're going to draft someone that early, you're probably going to want to pay them as an edge rusher over a linebacker, an off-ball linebacker at least. But I do think we have some recent comparisons. Micah Parsons, Abdul Carter, those are guys that you can look at and model. And I don't think he's alone in this draft class as a player we're going to have this conversation about, because we'll talk about him later in the show. Anthony Hill Jr. from Texas has some snaps at edge rusher that look better than his snaps at off ball. So I think for these teams at the top of the draft, Reese is interesting. And then as we get into round 2, maybe round 3, Anthony Hill will be a player that we talk about in much the same way.
I think we all agreed that the range for Arvel Reese could be as early as number 2 overall to the Jets and perhaps somewhere in the top 10, if not number 2. And I think as you think about the value of that pick, while off-ball linebackers like Fred Warner are great players that can change the complexion of your defense, just from an asset allocation standpoint, if you're taking a player number 2 overall, I believe that he's got to become an edge at some point full-time in his NFL career to justify the utilization of that pick, especially for a team like the Jets that was 31st in sacks last season in the NFL. They had 26 total as a team. Only the Niners had fewer sacks than the Jets in 2025. Anyways, earlier this week I gave you the top defensive linemen to watch ahead of the Combine. Today I'm just giving you the top 5 linebackers in my estimation in this class. Let's start with number 5. And let's begin down in Austin, Texas with Anthony Hill Jr., a guy who I think the tape sometimes can be a little bit up and down, but at his best he is a hyper-athletic, fast trigger, playmaking linebacker who's got some sack production over each of the past 2 years, production in the passing game as well with interceptions, and also a forced fumble-making machine. I think a guy who goes somewhere in the first 2 rounds of the upcoming draft. We'll stay in the SEC. I'm still getting used to calling Texas and Missouri SEC schools. My number 4 linebacker, though, is a familiar name for those that have watched football for the past 20 years. It's Josiah Trotter from Missouri. Yes, the son of Jeremiah Trotter, the younger brother of Jeremiah Trotter Jr. He's very different than his brother, though, who got taken by the Eagles in the 5th round a couple of years ago. Smaller linebacker, more fluid athlete. This is a thumper. This is a guy that wants to meet you head-to-head, take you face on. This is an old-school throwback linebacker, has some shades of his father's game in his current skill set. Let's go to number 3 here, and this is a player who just a couple of years ago was playing at the University of Central Arkansas. Jake Golday's got great range, 6'3", 240 pounds, got some playmaking as well. He is all over the field, though, for that Cincinnati defense. Had a terrific final season for the Bearcats, a guy who I do think has a chance to go in the first 40 or so selections. Really, really impressive rise over the past couple of seasons for Jake Golday. Number 2, you won't be surprised by the top 2 players on this list. C.J. Allen, who's 20 years old. He turns 21 on March 1st, just about a week and a half away from right now. Natural quarterback. He's been playing in this Georgia defense for the past 3 seasons, had his best season this past year, including 3.5 sacks. Incredibly smart player, great football IQ, outstanding leadership. I use the word safe with C.J. Allen, not to suggest he doesn't have a high ceiling, but to say that I think this guy's going to be a darn good pro no matter what happens, and certainly has some big-time potential as well. Finally, last but not least, I don't think anybody will be surprised to hear that Sonny Styles from Ohio State is the number 1 inside linebacker on my board, a top 10 player overall as well. Styles was a safety just a couple of years ago. In 2024, he had 6 sacks. He was all over the field for Ohio State as a pass rusher and a blitzer. This past year, that production dropped down, but he has legitimate sideline-to-sideline range. Of course, he has good coverage skills given his safety background. He also is a fast trigger in the running game. He covers so much ground and does so smartly and instinctively. Top 10 player on my board, a guy's going to go very early in this draft class. And Matt, of course, the king of the comp, Matt, is there a player that Sonny Styles currently reminds you of?
Yeah, Field, watching Sonny Styles, it's easy to fall in love, like you said, with the range, with the speed, the positionless ability as a former safety, someone that has come off the edge. Overshadowed a little bit this year by Arvel Reese, but still the number 7 overall player on my board. And when I watch him, I see Fred Warner, another guy, 6'4", 243 pounds for Styles. That range at middle linebacker is rare. That length at middle linebacker is rare. That's something that Styles has shown consistently over the last 2 years, that whole field range. To play NFL hash mark to hash mark, sideline to sideline, whether he's stacked in the middle or lining up off ball, Fred Warner has made a living, a Hall of Fame career off that range. And some of that is the quick trigger, some of that's the quick eyes and the processing speed to see where the ball's going, but then to have the speed to get there. And you mentioned it, the strong safety background shows up in coverage. The coverage ability, he can carry wide receivers still at 6'4", 243 pounds. He can carry tight ends. Running backs are erased because of that coverage skill. Fred Warner, the best coverage linebacker in the NFL for the last decade at this point, probably. And I see a lot of the similar shades to Sonny Styles' game in terms of how he's going to be deployed in the middle of a 4-3 or 4-2-5 defense. He's someone that can truly align anywhere and take over that quarterback position at linebacker.
Yeah, look, I like the comparison, man. You know, I like bigger linebackers. I like guys who are 6'3", 6'4 plus. Styles, Golday, Hill, all of these guys are going to measure in somewhere around 6'0", 3'0", and above. Why is that? Why do I like those guys? Because, look, they pack the middle of the field, and when you're talking about the passing game, they make it hard for quarterbacks to make those second to third level layered throws because these guys are so long and so rangy. Look, Fred Warner, without a doubt, to me, is the standard. And why? Look, I like the Sonny Styles comparison. He's got a little bit of ways to go to match Fred Warner just in terms of this. Fred Warner's explosiveness, his short area explosiveness, you see it. It looks ridiculous. I mean, you shouldn't be able to do that at 6'3", 6'4", 245 pounds. Your feet shouldn't move that fast. But they do, and that's why he's the very best. But these guys all have skills. They are thumpers. They should be three-down players that you can move all over the place. I love this class of off-ball backers. And it started down at the Senior Bowl field, as you know. Yeah. I like how this group looks, though.
Yeah, we got two guys that I think will go in the first round, or could go in the first round. Certainly Sonny Styles and also C.J. Allen. Wouldn't surprise me, though, if all five of the guys that I mentioned were top 75 overall picks. Let's wrap up our discussions on the front seven today and dive into some players that could be taken or more likely will be taken on day 2 or day 3 that we think deserve a bit more shine. Lewis, I'll start with you.
Yeah, for me, it's defensive lineman L.T. Overton from Alabama, who's a combination edge player, defensive tackle 3 technique. He's a guy who can play base defensive end in a 4-down front, meaning a typical 4-3, or you could move him inside and he could play that 4-eye in a 3-down odd front alignment because he's 6'5", 280 pounds. He's a guy who I want to see how he runs and how he drills once he gets to the combine because he's got some skills that some teams really would cover.
I'm going to go to Gabe Akis, who led the Big Ten in sacks this past season at Illinois, had nearly 20 sacks over the past 2 years. If you're looking for a tough, heavy-handed, powerful rusher, Gabe Akis certainly fits the bill. And while he's going to make his money for his pass rushing acumen, this is a guy that's also going to help you set the edge in the running game. Matt, who's your pick?
Yeah, I'm going to go with the linebacker to keep the trend going today. Jacob Rodriguez from Texas Tech, who I think should have got a lot more votes for the Heisman Trophy than he did this year. Just a total playmaker, run stuffing, sacks, interceptions, pass breakups. He does it all, even scored a touchdown on offense. He had a great season for Tech, a great Senior Bowl week as well. So I can't wait to see what he does at the combine. I know there's going to be some conversation about athletic ability, explosiveness in the lower body like we've talked about with these other prospects. But in terms of just pure football players, Jacob Rodriguez is one of the best in this class.
Yeah, he was excellent this past season. He began his career at West Virginia, finished up the past couple of years, several years, I should say now, at Texas Tech. And Lewis, the three of us saw him down at Mobile at the Senior Bowl this past week. You may have called some of his games during his career as well. What are your impressions of Rodriguez as a player?
Look, linebacker is one of the hardest positions to play mentally because of the conflict that you're in every play as far as is it run, is it pass? I got to stop the run, but at the same time, got to be able to get back and get into my zone drops or man-covered responsibility if it's pass. Jacob can do that as well as anyone. Remember, he's a former quarterback who's able to really decipher offensive tells in terms of linemen. Are they heavy or light on their stance? What do the splits look like? What's the depth of the running back? What's the quarterback's feet look like under center? These are all things that help him get a jump on plays and why he was a turnover machine at Texas Tech and why he was a turnover machine down at the Senior Bowl as well, where we saw him getting his hands on balls all the time.
Yeah, we have to talk about former quarterback, right? So you see that. The understanding of the game, the knowledge of the game definitely shows up now that he's on defense. And I'll make this prediction here early. Jacob Rodriguez might not be a top 100 pick in this draft. He will be a starter in the NFL. He will be one of those guys, if we're sitting on the desk day 3 in Pittsburgh and he's drafted by Seattle or the Steelers or the Commanders, a team that has a needed inside linebacker, I would not be surprised if he works his way into a rookie starter position and then has a very nice long career because of the instincts, the football IQ, the awareness, and the toughness that he plays with.
Yeah, perhaps no player has mastered the peanut punch better in this class than Rodriguez. Part of the reason why he had 7 forced fumbles last season. That's the tied for the most by any player in the FBS over the past 10 seasons. Lewis, what's the trade-off you're getting? Because obviously, if he's got all this production, there's got to be some sort of limitations here. And in his case, it's probably the size. How are you able to sort of account for that as defensive staff when you bring a player like Jacob Rodriguez into the fold?
Well, I think when you have someone like that, number one, they have to have a high degree of football IQ, meaning they have to be able to get off the spot immediately without a whole lot of false steps so they can beat people in terms of their run entry fits. They can beat linemen before they get there. If they are going to have to take on, they have to have great hand usage, and Jacob can work on that. Those are all teachable type of things. In the pass game, it's about anticipation, efficient footwork, and being able to finish on the football, whether that be with picks or, as you just mentioned, punching the ball out. These are all the kind of things that you have to weigh heavily when you're talking about someone who maybe doesn't have the size, speed, hitting ability as an Arvel Reese. And there's plenty of guys who have made a great career in the NFL with those kind of traits.
Man, that turnover making carried over to the Senior Bowl. During practice that week, he had an interception, he had a pair of forced fumbles as well. It seems like Jacob Rodriguez simply finds a football. He also scored last year on offense for Texas Tech.